Hi, Chapter 1, Takis and the 20. It had been a long night for Takis. Ever since the weather had turned cold, sleep was just a dream to the young boy. He would try to rest during the day's warmth in a sunny spot off to the side from the busyness of the big city that he called home. Takis has lived here his whole short life and could barely remember when he had his own bed, his family, and the life that most take for granted. These few remembered facts helped Takis to make it through the daily struggle that would bring him to the next day of challenges. He knew that if it once was, then it could be again, someday. He hoped, he had faith that this would be so, although it seemed so far away. His stomach growled and returned his attention to today's work. Get something to eat. It was just past 4 a.m., and he would have to wait a few hours before the sun would illuminate his breath and offer respite from the night's chill. He reached into his tattered coat's pockets, hoping to find a packet of soup crackers that he often took from the condiment station at the fast food joint he frequented to ask customers for $1 or two. This morning there were no crackers, only 2 sugar packets. Takis hated the taste of sugar, contrary to those of his age who he noticed that they couldn't seem to get enough of its sweetness. He held these packets in case of an emergency. They never took away the hunger pains, but the sugar could give him a boost of energy to get away from any trouble that he might come his way. Sometimes he would give those sweet packets to a younger pioneer like himself. Takis never thought himself homeless. No, this thought would leave his young mind hopeless for any possible future. Takis was on an adventure. He was exploring the city and studying human behavior on the front lines. His adolescent mind kept him going by the playful notion of him being a renowned hero of the human condition. It was his way of coping. It was his escape from reality. He noticed that many others, older than him, used drugs to do the same and to numb their pains. Takis would never numb himself. He made a pact with his best friend, himself, to never do so. Without this friend, Takis would never have made it this far. A subway train whooshed by him, bringing a colder wind to chill him further before it screeched to a stop. The platform was bare as it was a Sunday morning, and the work rush would be delayed by this fact for another few hours. Takis studied the train and those that entered and left its cold, hard shell. He smiled at the graffiti that read, "Far away." Someone's tag that inspired his youthful mind to think of a warm, sunny beach somewhere in the world where the chill would be contained, only for a short time, in a fancy glass with some pineapple juice or orange juice and some ice cubes. He had seen such a sight on a billboard, which was his home for a night. Takis's vacation was interrupted by the squeal of the train's steel wheels that carried the passengers away from the platform. His stomach growled again, this time a little bit angrier. He wished he could hunt an animal and kill it, to cook it over a huge fire like he had seen in a movie. He wished to be a real pioneer. Hunger, once again, tried to take away his thought game with another growl. The corner of his eye caught an old man stirring from his drunken sleep on a nearby bench. Takis moved away from this as he had learned not to be anywhere near a drunk person when they awoke from their bleak dreams into an even bleaker reality. Takis was an anthropologist, even though he did not know what one was. His studies taught him much about the civilized wilds in which he lived. Takis left the station and worked his way uptown, although not too uptown, for he knew those with much hardly gave little, even to a ratty-looking boy as he was. Takis knew that the folks with little knew what it was to be hungry, whether it be for food or just a better life, as he had heard them say. What more could they need if they had food and a safe place to sleep? They seemed to him to be doing all right, as they were clean and had decent clothes. He saw that they had expensive watches, jewelry, and phones that cost as much as a feast that even his childlike imagination could not wonder. Takis would see them pass by him all day long, with rarely a smile on their faces. Their attention would be on their phones. He was somewhat thankful for those phones because when they did notice him, he'd be met with a sour look or a scowl. Takis never understood why this was. Surely they could be happy with such things that they held so dearly. He never realized that they were reacting to their own cold hearts, tugging at their consciences, that argued within themselves whether or not they should help the boy standing in front of them. Takis had a heart. His heart did not know the way of the heartless. His condition created a war in their souls that fought their selfish desires to ignore a boy standing there indeed in need. Of course, Takis had everything he needed, mostly. His hunger reminded him of today's mission. He moved through the ever-growing crowd towards a small restaurant owned by an old man and his wife. Takis knew that the gifts of food that they would occasionally give him would fight the gnawing of the incessant hunger. He turned the corner to face the expanse of Central Avenue, the widest and busiest street in the whole city. The cold wind kissed his frozen cheeks. He shivered from the base of his spine. 2 more blocks, and hopefully the rice will be hot and ready as a gift for his belly. Takis wasn't sure if the kindness would be offered this day. This made him even more grateful just for the possibility of receiving it. He quickened his pace in anticipation. The crowds thickened around him in their bustle of city life. The dark sky had a purple hue from the far-reaching sun's rays. Takis was joyful. He always had joy. After all the things he had witnessed, after all the nights alone in the cold, and even after the violence he suffered from the cold hearts, or the wild ones, as he called them, there remained inside him joy. Maybe this is why he was met with hostility and contempt from those that had much. He had something that their efforts could never produce: joy. Takis smelled many delicious odors coming from the bakery amongst the filth of civilization as he passed by. A smile befriended his tenacious joy as he noticed the open sign illuminated in the window of the old man's restaurant across the river of cars and buses that winded through his concrete jungle home. Takis waited to ford this paved river. He positioned himself to the side of all the different tribes that surrounded him while waiting for the light to change. He directed his gaze towards the ground, as this kept the wild ones from their attack. Takis knew that eye contact would bring out the worst in many of them. Right there in front of him, mixed in with the garbage in the gutter, he noticed a $20 bill. It was partially frozen to the street, with the free end waving to him in the cold wind. Takis bent down, picked it up, and quickly put it out of sight, for he knew others in his condition would take it from him. A warmth of relief washed over his soul. A smile came over his face to match his joy. Takis now had the power of choice. He could erase his stomach's complaints, and if he chose wisely, he could ease his journey of survival for a few days. The light changed, and he crossed over to the other side towards the rice awaiting him. As he walked into the Chinese food joint, he was greeted by the owner, who had been hunched over a steaming wok of made-from-scratch teriyaki sauce. "Takis! So good to see you have made it another day in our jungle." The owner's broken English reassured Takis. "I have some fresh rice for you, just made," he boasted proudly, as if Takis was a king of their jungle, and he was offering an endless feast. The rice was always a feast for Takis. "Good morning, Mr. Chang," Takis greeted him with his dirty-faced smile. Mr. Chang came from behind the counter and sat at his table towards the back of the small restaurant, where there were 2 cups of steaming hot green tea. "Come here and sit with me," he beckoned Takis. Takis walked over and sat down and began to tell his old friend about last night's adventures. Mr. Chang listened to Takis tell of his adventures as they sipped their tea and Takis ate his rice. The sun rose and brought its warm rays into the restaurant's window. The 2 of them sat until the stories were done and the many cups of tea were drank. Takis thanked his aged friend politely and excused himself to go back into the wilds of the city. Chang returned to his grind of feeding the people of the city. It would be many hours later that he would notice a wet $20 bill carefully hidden under the empty plate that held a child's breakfast of rice from a man that had toiled to keep a small restaurant alive in the concrete jungle in which they both lived. It's the end of part 1. Thanks for listening. Shalom.